Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up, because today on Boss Economics World, we're diving headfirst into the steaming pile of economic nonsense that is the US government's latest masterclass in mismanagement. You guessed it, we're talking tariffs, trade wars, and the slow-motion car crash that is the American auto industry. Spoiler alert, the government's driving, and they've got no hands on the wheel. Welcome back, my fellow economic truth seekers, to another episode of Boss Economics World, where we cut through the government spin, the corporate PR fluff, and the mainstream media's hot air to bring you the cold, hard facts about what's really tanking our economy. If you're one of the millions of ordinary Americans who've been watching your financial dreams get crushed under the weight of reckless policy, or a finance pro trying to make sense of this clown show, this episode is for you. Today, we're shining a spotlight on General Motors, yes, the supposed American icon that's importing more cars into the US than even Toyota, and how the government's tariff tantrums are hammering the auto industry, jacking up prices, and screwing over consumers. Oh, and of course, we'll lay bare the deeper economic rot behind it all, courtesy of Uncle Sam's genius economic strategy. Let's get into it, shall we? First, let's talk about the headline shocker. General Motors, the pride of Detroit, imported 1.23 million cars into the US last year, nearly half of all the vehicles it sold here, according to global data. That's right, folks, more than Toyota, more than anyone. And where are these American cars coming from? South Korea, China, you name it, anywhere but the good old USA models like the Chevrolet Trax and Buick Envista. Built in Korea, where cheap labor and lax regulations keep production costs low and profits high. Now, I'm not here to bash GM for chasing profits, that's what corporations do. But here's the kicker, the very government that claims to protect American jobs is now slapping 25% tariffs on these imported cars, courtesy of former President Trump's trade war, which, let's be honest, has been enthusiastically continued by the current administration under the guise of economic patriotism. GM is now staring down the barrel of a $5 billion tariff bill in 2025, which they estimate will slash their earnings before interest and taxes by a whopping 20%. Ford's not faring much better, facing a $2.5 billion hit, though they're trying to offset it with $1 billion in cost savings, which, let's be real, usually means layoffs, wage cuts, and squeezing suppliers until they squeak. And Stellantis? They're importing 44% of their Chryslers, Dodges, Jeeps, and Rams, so they're sweating bullets too. Meanwhile, Tesla and the EV startups like Rivian and Lucid are sitting pretty, building most of their cars in the US. But let's not kid ourselves, those cars are for the Elon Musk fanboys and the bougie coastal elites, not the average Joe trying to afford a Chevy Trax to get to work. Now, here's where the government's hypocrisy comes in. Trump, and now Biden, who's kept these tariffs in place, claims this is all about bringing jobs back to America and countering unfair trade barriers from other countries. Sounds noble, right? But hold on a second. If the goal is to help American automakers, why are GM, Ford, and Stellantis, the very companies you claim to champion, getting absolutely crushed by these tariffs? Why are you punishing the companies that are already struggling to compete in a global market, while doing nothing to address the root causes of why they're building cars overseas in the first place? Oh, that's right, because this isn't about fixing the economy. It's about political theater, sound bites, and pandering to the America First crowd, all while the real economic damage piles up. Now, let's peel back the layers of this economic onion and see what's really going on here. Because, folks, this isn't just about GM stock dropping 14% this year, while Ford, with lower tariff exposure, is somehow eking out gains. This is about the broader economic fallout of these tariffs, and how they're exacerbating an already dire situation for American consumers and workers. Let's start with the consumer, you know, the little guy the government claims to care about. Jeff Schuster, former VP of Research at Global Data, projects that these tariffs will kill off 1.5 million lower-priced vehicles in the US market. Why? Because slapping a 25% tariff on a Korean-made Chevy Trax or a Chinese-imported GM model makes them uncompetitive. GM CFO, Paul Jacobson, says they'll offset 30% of the tariff impact through cost cuts rather than raising prices, but let's be real, those cost cuts only go so far. Eventually, the rest of that tariff burden gets passed on to you, the consumer. And for cars coming from China, it's even worse, they're now facing a 145% tariff, making them essentially unsellable in the US. What does this mean for the average American? It means the auto affordability crisis, already a full-blown disaster, is about to get even uglier. The average price of a new car in the US is now $48,000, up 21% from just 5 years ago, according to Kelley Blue Book's latest data as of October 2025. And that's before these tariffs really start to bite. For the millions of Americans who rely on affordable models like the Trax or the Trailblazer, both of which start under $25,000, these tariffs are a gut punch. As Schuster puts it, it does take away the entry market and obviously hurts those buyers that are in that space. The collateral damage on that consumer is probably greater than is being anticipated. Translation: the government's America First policies are making it harder for Americans to afford basic transportation. Bravo, geniuses! Now, let's talk about the supposed job creation that these tariffs are meant to deliver. Trump, and now Biden, claims that forcing companies to build more cars in the US will bring back manufacturing jobs. And sure, there's some evidence of companies shifting production stateside. Hyundai, for example, just announced a $21 billion expansion plan in the US in March 2025, aiming to double its domestic production. Toyota's already got nearly half its US sales coming from American factories, backed by over $50 billion in investments and 49,000 direct jobs. Sounds great, right? Not so fast. Here's the dirty little secret the government doesn't want you to know: even if automakers do build more cars in the US, it's not going to produce the jobs boom they're promising. Why? Because modern manufacturing isn't the labor-intensive beast it was in the 1950s. As Mark Wakefield of Alex Partners points out, if you move a job from Mexico to the US, you're going to add more robot sales than you are jobs, because you're going to end up automating a lot of things. In fact, according to a 2024 report from the Economic Policy Institute, automation has already displaced 1.7 million manufacturing jobs in the US since 2000, and that trend is only accelerating. So, while the government spins fairy tales about a manufacturing renaissance, the reality is that these tariffs are more likely to boost sales of industrial robots than paychecks for American workers. But wait, there's more. Let's not forget the global trade implications of this tariff madness. The US isn't the only country that can play the tariff game. China, South Korea, and the European Union have already retaliated with their own tariffs on American exports, hitting everything from agriculture to tech. According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, U.S. tariffs and the resulting retaliatory tariffs have cost American businesses and consumers $134 billion since 2018, with $52 billion of that hitting in 2024 alone. And guess what? The auto industry is right in the crosshairs. American-made cars and auto parts are now facing steep tariffs in key export markets, making it harder for GM, Ford, and Stellantis to compete globally. Take China, for example, the world's largest auto market, with over 30 million vehicles sold annually, according to the China Association of Automobile Manufacturers, CAAM, in 2024. U.S. auto exports to China have already plummeted by 40% since the trade war began, per a 2025 report from the Peterson Institute for International Economics. And with China now imposing its own 145% tariffs on American-made cars in retaliation, that market is essentially closed to U.S. automakers. So much for winning the trade war, huh? Now, let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture, because, folks, this isn't just about tariffs. This is about decades of government mismanagement that's left our economy vulnerable, our industries uncompetitive, and our workers screwed. Why are American automakers like GM building so many cars overseas in the first place? Because the U.S. government has systematically failed to create a business environment that encourages domestic manufacturing. Skyrocketing labor costs, thanks to outdated union agreements and a failure to invest in workforce training, have made U.S. production uncompetitive. Add to that a corporate tax system that, until recently, incentivized offshoring, and a regulatory environment that buries manufacturers in red tape, and it's no wonder GM's churning out Traxxas in Korea instead of Kansas. And let's not forget the government's role in tanking the broader economy. The Federal Reserve's reckless monetary policy, keeping interest rates at near zero for over a decade, then jacking them up to 5.5% in a desperate bid to tame inflation, has crushed consumer demand and made financing a new car a pipe dream for millions. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, inflation hit 8.3% in 2024, the highest in 40 years, and even with a slight cooldown to 6.1% in Q3 2025, the damage is done. Real wages, that's your paycheck, adjusted for inflation, have fallen by 3.2% since 2021, per the Economic Policy Institute. Meanwhile, the national debt has ballooned to $35 trillion, or 125% of GDP, according to the U.S. Treasury's October 2025 data, leaving the government with zero fiscal wiggle room to invest in the kind of infrastructure, education, and innovation that could actually make American manufacturing competitive again. Instead, what do we get? Tariffs. Tariffs that punish American companies, jack up prices for American consumers, and do nothing to address the root causes of our economic woes. It's like putting a band-aid on a broken leg and calling it surgery. And the worst part? The government knows it's not working. They've even admitted it, quietly, by phasing in tariffs on auto parts over 2 years and exempting automakers from additional levies on steel and aluminum, as announced on April 29, 2025. If that's not an admission of failure, I don't know what is. So, what's the fix, you ask? Well, here at Boss Economics World, we don't just point out problems, we demand solutions. And no, the answer isn't more tariffs or more government handouts to corporations. The answer is to get the government out of the way and let the free market do its job, while fixing the structural failures they've spent decades ignoring. First, cut the red tape. Slash the regulatory burden on manufacturers by 50%, starting with the EPA's suffocating emissions rules, which, according to a 2024 study by the National Association of Manufacturers, cost the auto industry $12 billion annually in compliance costs. Second, reform the tax code to incentivize domestic production, not offshoring. Make the 2017 corporate tax cuts permanent, and add a 10% investment tax credit for companies that build new factories in the U.S. Third, invest in workforce training, not union handouts, but real, market-driven programs that equip workers with the skills to compete in a high-tech, automated manufacturing world. And finally, stop the trade war insanity. Negotiate fair, reciprocal trade deals that open markets for American exports, not close them. But let's be real, folks, none of this is going to happen as long as our so-called leaders are more interested in scoring political points than fixing the economy. So, it's up to us, the ordinary Americans, the finance pros, the truth seekers, to hold them accountable. Share this video, spread the word, and demand better. Because if we don't, the economic car crash we're witnessing today is just the beginning. That's all for today, folks. If you're as fed up with this economic clown show as I am, hit that like button, smash subscribe, and ring the bell for more Boss Economics World. And remember, the government may be driving us off a cliff, but we've got the power to take the wheel. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and stay boss.